Tonight I'm going to talk some about a subject that everyone keeps asking about, is architecture. In at least two instances I'm going to discuss that ever popular subject of buildings. The first one being a drawing I have made of the Life Company building. If you will notice this building, if everyone can see it, I have drawn to represent three different levels. A red level, a blue level, and of course a red level on top. Now this is the Life Company building, while reminding you that there is no out there. So that building exists even in the binary world in both locations. That is, if you were ordinary and binary, it exists out there and it exists in here. I want to point out some of the features of the way this building that houses Life's Corporation is arranged. I'm going to give you several descriptions of what takes place on these three different levels. It's like three different departments, the red, the blue, and the yellow departments of this three-story building that houses the Life Corporation. Now, among other descriptions I could use, I will point out, starting at the red level, that it is in charge of mining, manufacturing, and distribution. The blue level is in charge of sales, advertising, and employee relations. And the yellow story, the yellow department, is in charge of research, development, and general management. Now, some of the aspects within this kind of description that I could mention that is very, very easy for all of humanity to overlook, and is in a sense off on a side road, even easier for people who think they're involved with some sort of mystical activity, is to forget this, is that everything derives ultimately from this planet, taking that in conjunction with the total process of photosynthesis, that it all goes back to Mother Earth in that being part of the process of photosynthesis. In the upper levels, the two upper levels, you would find the source of all dreams that are not edible, fuckable, or chrome-plated. And yet, the red level remains the ultimate source. It is only in the two upper levels that you would find daydreams and any kind of apparent plans that had to do with either things that were not edible, were not involved with sex, and by chrome-plated I mean, as one of my cheap shots with a capital C and a capital S, automobiles. Anything fancy, anything that would catch the eye of a pack rat or a human from Alabama. Also, the upper stories believe that they are the source of all that is creative. But the ultimate realization of every dream and plan requires that one go back to the minds. And it does not matter how, or it does not matter that the plans may have apparently originated even from the heady heights of the yellow circuit. But ordinary consciousness continually forgets this. Because you could apparently be having dreams of a quite avant-garde nature, whether it seemed to be artistic, whether it seemed to be something, let us say, having to do with computers, that may seem to be something right at the cutting edge of today's technology. that apparently one could sit up here, up in the yellow department, with that limited amount of window space. I started draw it with no windows. Some of you who notice, if it shows up on the camera down in the yellow, the red department, you notice you got broken windows and it's plenty of light, smokestacks, large doors for shipping. These little offshoots over here really had to do with the mining processes going into the earth itself. But up in the yellow story, let us say, they could imagine that one is sitting around involved with almost pure, abstract plans and dreams of some kind. But for it to ultimately be realized, you've got to go back to the minds. The M-I-N-E-S, not the M-I-N-D-S. Because no matter what the plan is, no matter what it seems to be involved with, if it is going to leave the realm of thinking of action and go into the world of action, somebody's got to get back in the fucking minds. I could also point out to you that it is up in the upper two levels, and one of the upper two in particular is involved with this, is where passions are vent. It's where passions are used, and from a certain viewpoint, from our viewpoint, even where passions are abused. One instance. Union activity, the real union headquarters where the shop steward has his little desk or his niche, is down in the red department. But where employee complaints, where negotiation between apparent management up in the yellow compared to the people down sweating in the mines, where this is taken care of is in the blue department. Now down in the red, the union, the workers, the masses, be it out there, if you're still binary, or be it in here. It's here where they feel like that they need to organize. And sure enough, you will find, superficially, the union at work. There'll be some man down there with a cigar and a beer gut and a desk and a name card identifying him as the shop steward, or maybe even president of the union or the local. But when it gets to complaint time, when it gets to dealing with contracts, when it gets to the questions of rearranging schedules, the decisions are not made down here. The passions find their outlet, and there seems to be some conditional arrangements made between management and the workers, but it is made up in the upper stories. On camera, I don't guess I can see me, but I continue to point to the blue. So I'm giving a very crude hint for crude people when I say the upper stories, and I'm still pointing to the blue. The structure and the relationship between these three different levels in the building that houses Life's corporation is that at the red level, in the lower story, there is a continual preaching going on amongst those involved with mining and manufacturing and distribution. And that story is the absolute need for cooperation. That the apparent desires of the individual must be submerged into the will of the workers, of the larger group. Withal, in the upper stories, there is the cry that is passed about. There is the message, whether it be on the wall or on someone's desk, or whether it be them chitting and chatting with mechanical talk and cliches, and that is, we must be ourselves. You cannot be involved with worrying about what your neighbor thinks. That is, our competitors. You cannot do that. You have got to operate on an individual level. Nothing creative, no sorts of advertising campaign. We'd never come up with any new development. those involved in the laboratories would cease all research. If we were continually tied down to those involved in such activities, worrying about, well, what would so-and-so say? What would the people over in some other lab think if they knew we were trying to work on this kind of project? Might I also point out to you that I have tried to give you note of this insofar as this whole corporation existing in the sense of the circuitry of life itself and its own nervous system, that you have areas of the world that apparently these particular groups of people are involved, primarily this whole little group, whether it be a nation, some area of this planet, seem to be almost entirely involved with Red Department activities, the mining, the manufacturing, the distribution, the getting of the hands dirty. We're in there, and by the same token, what I was reminding you of that I have pointed out that I know on several occasions did not appear to have any particular object in mind that you could fathom at the time, whereas other areas of the world would seem to be involved with activities that would belie that kind of cooperative spirit, that there would be no such thing, for instance, as the so-called arts. Everything that was ever going to be written, everything that was ever going to be painted, it would have been done once, and then over the last 6,000 years there would only been the slightest variations. Put it to you another way, if you can follow this quick enough, you do not find anything that would pass for original art. And I'm not making or suggesting any comment that there is an objective way to view what ordinary people do in the arts. But still, even at the ordinary level, you cannot look at a closed society today. You cannot look at Russia or China or Albania and expect to find any originality, any creative urges and juices being manifested by the people. If anything, in fact, Russia is a prime example. They still are involved with, I guess it could be called propagandist art. What passes for it over there is posters with such slogans as, we got to all work together. Or posters saying, you know, don't dress differently, don't have strange ideas, you know, we must all stick together or the West will get us. There is a real basis. Must I remind everyone, I am not talking about buildings, I'm not talking about nations, I'm not talking about politics, I'm not talking about art. That you don't live in this building is you. But everyone on this planet, even all ordinary people, have all three stories. Engaged in a kind of minimal activity. Everyone on this planet, assuming by now that everyone on this planet has a language, then everyone on this planet, all individuals, and therefore, of course, all groups, but they have the three stories of life's building operating at a kind of minimal degree. So everyone has the Red Department in operation. They have mining and manufacturing and distribution. They have people down sweating. That is, there's a part of you that is engaged. It may be to a minimal degree if you're ordinary. It may be just enough to get the person up in the morning, take a shower, and drive to work, and then sit at a desk for 8 hours, and then drive home and sit in front of a TV for another 5 hours. That may be all that's required. Then what seems to be the middle story, it would be in charge. Parenthetically, let me point out, I only use 3 descriptions of it being engaged in sales, advertising, and employee relations. But you understand behind those 3, if I cared to, I could bring in a multitude times 3 of sins, that is, different activities within that. And you might note what little symbolic hints I gave on the blue level. Do you notice the little windows up there? Sort of artistic, unusual, at least compared to the rest of the building. Because you got to remember what kind of employees would be working up there in advertising. That got the first laugh, but how about sales? A lot of you laughed, reacted to the advertising, imagining people dressed in the latest fashions, using the latest hip phrases, on the latest drugs. That's not all. Sales are pretty good. The salesmen probably are still stuck with alcohol instead of drugs, but with good flashy clothes, with a tongue that would make glib look like it was cotton. And employee relationships they're having to deal with. They seem to be the spokesman between the two stories. But you can find the two stories that I said existing in you, but then you can find this whole situation in what appears to be not you. There's another aspect, is all three of these departments keep their own filing system, their own records, and by that I mean memory. They have, insofar as words will go for the time being, they have a separate memory system. You still must recall that anytime I speak about the red circuit doing something or the yellow circuit doing something, I normally point out that it is artificial, arbitrary, in the way in which I am doing it, and does not even possibly exist. Because all three stories are minimally operating in you, and there is not one aspect of this corporation that can operate by itself. But for the sake of drawing maps, it is as though each department has its own set of records. I was going to ask you a question. I've had a lot of you write me notes and respond to what I mentioned over the last several weeks about the muscles, the mind, and the respiratory system. Which, since it happens to be three, surely nobody will try to make any connection between this and anything else. But I was going to ask you a rhetorical question. Since I pointed out, and most of you saw or have seen some validity, some suspicious, possible validity, to me pointing out that all news seems to be bad news at the ordinary level, that all memory seems to be bad memory. As they say nowadays, nostalgia is not what it used to be. I was going to ask you a question. Could this be that all memory seems to either be negative or always seems to be surrounded by negativity, seems to be one step away? Even if it seems to be an almost pleasant recollection that somebody reminds you of, it's just one step, 1 second, one breath away from some negative recollection, some negative aspect of it. I was going to ask you to consider this. The structure, the way in which I have drawn this building that houses life, this corporation, that muscles would be the ultimate support. That is the red department. That inasmuch as all three departments are connected, therefore all three of their record-keeping systems are eventually connected, inseparable. That all memory, no matter from whence seems to be its immediate manifestation to you, it is supported ultimately down in the red department by the muscles. Then could it be that as muscles, quote, think about the past, they can, quote, only think about action, and they dread it. I just knew that was going to be a dead-end question with you people tonight, because I did take note of the moon just before I pulled in when 3 cars almost converged on me. I will not stop there. I'll try to prod somebody a little further. What I was putting into words is the fact that, in a quite real way, all memory is based upon the muscles. In the same way, this building, all the way up to the top, the yellow circuit up where management and the research and development laboratories are the highest part of the building from one viewpoint, especially physically, is absolutely supported by the red. Now, whatever goes on upstairs, remember, is supported by what is going on in the red department. That all dreams, all plans immediately revert back to the minds. Without that, there is no action. There's only thoughts of action. In that same sense, all memory, even though apparently is intellectual memory, which if any of you want to try that and see if you can find such a thing, but I know some of you would immediately want to ask that, so it can appear to be intellectual memory, or it certainly can appear to be blue department memory. But then what I was trying to get you to pursue on your own was it always seems, just almost without exception, that memory seems to have some negative flavor to it. Then could it have some connection with the fact that no matter where the memory seems to be talking from, what department, it is ultimately supported by the muscles. And what is the muscles' memory? What can muscles remember? They remember one thing, movement. What kind of fond memories do muscles in general have of movement? This is certainly not belying the fact, as all of you should damn well know, the great fun at times of just physical movement, running, out digging in the garden, putting up shingling, of just the red circuit involved with mining and manufacturing. But when it's over, what kind of memory do muscles have? Well, I'm getting somewhere with a few of you. Even though you know, even though you quote know, how much fun it is sometimes to get out and run. Try and you realize this yourself. You got your own laboratory there to work with. Do the muscles always say, wow, I always remember how much fun it is to run? Their memory can only be of action. But after the fact, do the muscles, I'm asking you, do they actually remember movement as being all that much fun? Not while they're doing it, but the memory of it. Well, let me take the next paragraph into the area of the muscles, the mind, and the respiratory system. The muscles, to pull this paragraph close to another one we've been talking about, you can see that the muscles, dividing up the human organism temporarily and arbitrarily into muscles, mind, which is synonymous with the nervous system, but into muscles, mind, and the respiratory system, that the muscles are in charge of action. The mind's in charge of thinking of action. But there is a little situation to which everyone is victim to some degree. As both of these, the muscles and the mind, have access to and the ability to charge up the mid-system, that is the respiratory system. And they can do it from two different positions. But they have direct access to what would seem to be I can make you up several terms, but you've had your own experience. A charging up, a firing up, an attack upon, but it is a direct access that can come from two different directions. That can come from the apparent mind, although you can't separate it completely, but it would apparently come from the mind thinking about action, or it could come from the muscles and its involvement with action. And then it's almost as though you have a third possibility, a third area that can be directly affected by either one of these two extremes. Some of you have begun to write me little notes, and everyone has had this experience more than once in life of being emotional to the point. You know, death in the family, great fear that if you could now remember it, you could learn more than I'm telling you, because I'm not going to draw out absolutely simplistic maps any longer, or not as simplistic as I used to. But what seems to be very astringent emotional experiences do what primarily? And initially, they affect the respiratory system. Now it could only be a matter of a few seconds later, a few minutes, that you hear that a dear friend or somebody in your family has died. And within minutes, it can very likely affect your muscles, that is your posture. That you may be sitting somewhere and just suddenly slump down, that they tell you that so-and-so just died. It may take several seconds, but it's just, and it's not some personality habit. It's not something you picked up, but the muscles will react to it. The mind itself, using these three temporary descriptions of the muscles, the mind, and the respiratory system, then the mind gets affected. Well, ordinarily people in the horizontal world might say, well, the person almost went into shock. After it hits the respiratory system, then maybe within a few minutes or a few seconds it hits the muscles, and it changes your posture, and then very shortly it can affect this. That somebody say, well, Jesus, you know, I guess we were to go over there and see and visit the family. And you go, yeah. And they say, well, let's take your car. And they say, are you driving? And you suddenly, you can't remember whether you drove a car there. You're sitting in a restaurant, and you sit there and just, the mind seems to go blank. I can't remember whether I drove a car here or not. But initially, the impact is on the respiratory system. Now, since I have begun, if you did not notice, to try and get you to look at a possible dissection of some of the tricks I've been giving out through the years, I recently gave you one possible new way to look at the old honored trick of mine of when you've got the blues, go run. And all you got to do is run far enough, and it's guaranteed results that you will not come back with the blues. And I gave you several weeks ago one way to consider that in a more, shall we say, scientific, which is much closer to reality than so-called psychological, or much less so-called spiritual descriptions about why things are as they are, or why a certain thing seems to affect the total organism of man. But based upon this description of man, the organism, for temporary purposes, being divisible into muscles, the mind, and the respiratory system, can you see that if you affect one department, if you affect one of these three, just as seems to happen in everyday life, such as hearing about death, and the way I pointed out to you, it will eventually, or can eventually affect all three areas. If you go ahead and stick your finger and affect one of them, there is no choice unless you got involved with extraneous magic that was not even profitable. That if you just go ahead, such as run when you got the blues, that is, put the muscles in work when the respiratory system seems to be annoying you, when you come back, the respiratory system will not be in the same condition it was as you were sitting there with the, quote, blues. That you put the muscles into operation, and something happens to the respiratory system. Or those of you who care for it another way, as most of you know from experience, you may be sitting there with the good old-time blues, and not just the respiratory system, it's now into the mind of you sitting there, and all you're doing is having daydreams of death, destruction, having cancer of the nose and my whole face fall off. Just terrible things. Go out, get the muscles going, and run and come back, and not only will the respiratory system have changed, all the dreams of death. By the time you get back, you got the respiratory system operating in a different manner. You got the muscles have now had a biochemical effect upon the whole organism, and there is no question as to the mind has going to have been affected. Because the dreams of death and destruction having captured the face, dying a horrible death, you can come back and sit down and you can glance down at the paper that you left there that was saying 14 new causes of cancer discovered, and you were sitting at the table reading that 30 minutes ago, and you sit there and the mind does have one glimpse back about, oh yeah, that was it. And all you can do is get one glimpse, wipe away a little sweat, and look for a glass of water. And it's almost as though one of the more unprofitable voices from your viewpoint may be saying something like this, non-verbal, like, yeah, that's something to really worry about, but I'm going to have to calm down here. I got to get back in the mood to do it. That, yeah, I won't throw away the paper. I'll leave it here so I can come back and look at it. But, you know, right then, cancer of the face and death seems as far away. You know, in fact, that's the right kind of run, you should know by now. I never told anybody to do this, but if you knew you were going to die and you had the chance to do this right before you died, we'd go out, if justice would allow this, mechanical justice, is go out and run, you know, as far as you've ever done before, further, and then come back when it's just time to die, and you would not give a damn. There wouldn't be any fear or any feeling to be able to come back and have a certain kind of rhythm going to the respiratory system, have the muscles been involved with the transfer of certain biochemical activities, come back like this, and if you walked in the door and the doctor said, we just got back to test and you're going to die within a couple of minutes, it'd be like, well, all right, you know, could you get me a glass of water and let me prop my feet over and take my shoes off? But, and some of your laughter, without being able to analyze it, which is not even that important, but some of you are hearing the truth. It's that kind of feeling. If they said right then, oh, we just found you're going to die within 2 minutes. After a good 6 or 7 mile run, you think, well, I don't know. You know, if you say so, hand me a glass of water and let me get off these sweaty socks. But neuralize that. And it's not just death, but the whole area that seems to be the blues, the whole area that would seem to be some kind of emotional suffering in life. If you rearrange what seems to be your own natural relationship between the muscles, the mind, and the respiratory system, if you rearrange it from any direction, if you start anywhere, then that whole pattern is going to be broken up. Of course, then, I was going to say, how would you know that you're actually dying? I guess you'll have to check back with me. If you do that, and it's happening, you've got 2 minutes, and you still feel like it's important, I guess try to get in touch with me, and I'll... If you really feel like I'm about to miss something, I guess you'll have to check with me, and I'll tell you what to do right quick to go back and worry about it. Start off with a shot of this. And leave it on there for a couple of minutes while I talk. Well, I'm going to take this off down here so you can see the rest of it, and leave it on there maybe for 30 or 40 seconds, and everybody can get the picture. Right. Now back to buildings. I have drawn something else for you, and it has to do with the limitations of ordinary consciousness. And again, I am not going to make this as simplistic as I could. I'm going to do more hinting and sketching. In line with this, something else that many of you should be pursuing on your own, that I keep hinting at, is why is it that everything seems to lend itself to the number 3, to 3 dimensions? And it seems as though, from an extraordinary viewpoint and extraordinary lateral dimensions, I have shown that 3, even though I know you still have problems sometimes with thinking what is the 3rd area or what is the 3rd leg or what in the hell would be E, but that there is a minimal of 3 involved. that seems to support everything. But let me point out again, they're more than that. That's all that can be seen. And it takes extraordinary effort, and it takes some kind of unusual directions, and then the ability and the need to do it for you to ever see that there are three involved. But it's not three. They're more than that. That was a subparagraph. All right, now I want to point out a certain kind of very direct, a variation of line level consciousness, but putting it closer into actual three dimensions. It is like a horizon delusion, and it has to do with perspective. Now, I have drawn a rough curvature of the planet here, and three little buildings up there. The colors are of no great importance. I didn't use yellow because it's so weak, which somebody should check into that. Magic markers, even if they're very expensive, yellow doesn't get it. So I made one of them green tonight, just so you could see it better. Now I'm just going to make up a little story. And I'm going to give you a task having to do with this on your own. I'm just going to make up one story. You lived at such a spot that you could look up on the horizon and there were three buildings. Now let us say the first building, you would look up there and day after day, that's the red building on the left. Now you looked up there and every day, remember these colors don't get involved, I just drew it so you could see it. You looked up at the red building, and during the daylight hours there seemed to be outside here a certain kind of civilized, perhaps happy, creative kind of activity. To wit, let me make up, that you look out and there are people out painting, artists. There are people that you can see up there with wheels and doing pottery. Oftentimes you look over and there are little groups of people playing music. Other times you look over at the middle building, now painted green, and you see really very little activity as far as humans are concerned. But there are several other manifestations that are always going on during regular working hours. One is I drew a little smokestack up there. There seems to be noxious fumes, smoke coming out. Obnoxious odors, without any doubt, are coming from that building. They're loud noises, not pleasant noises, not music, but grating noises. Sometimes moans and shouts and screams come from inside the building. Then on your horizon, the one I painted blue over here on your right, it's a building, looks similar to the other three, but as far as you can tell, as far as you can see, nothing ever goes on. No noises, you never see people, never. The building's just there. I suggest to you, before I pull away the bottom part, that there is much that can be done with this, because it is, if you can move it off of the paper, that's why I did it this way. It is an extension of line-level consciousness, of my line drawn through the brain on that nervous system diagram that I have used recently. This is literally a kind of prison of 3D consciousness, but it continually creates what amounts to an artificial horizon that you look out and it would be like seeing this. We have changed the perspective, have changed the consciousness of the viewer, which indeed has changed the perspective, and this artificial horizon has been altered. And in the example, the story I've made up, even though I did not I'm not making an apology because I could have done it, but I did not do a small work of art here. But I assume you can see that we have changed the perspective, and from a different perspective where the horizon has now moved, that it would be seen that these apparent three separate buildings are indeed all three connected. They in fact have doorways. And not only the building's connected, people can pass, even beyond the building itself, through these areas from building to building. To continue the example I made of, over here in the red building, where out in the yard you used to see people involved with painting, doing pottery, playing music, maybe even looked out and there seemed to be people sitting in chairs with their feet propped up and writing. You know, who knows what? They seem to be sitting there writing. Then you change the perspective and you find out what's going on here. Let's say then we found out that, let me start over with the blue one, that this would be, in a sense, equal to the red story in my other piece of architecture. This little part out here that I'm sure doesn't show up good is like a mine shaft. And there's loading docks. But the mine shafts, since everything originally and ultimately has to come from the mines, out here you don't see anything going on, but this is where the mining is taking place. This is where everything ultimately is derived from. In the middle section is where they are stripping up timber, making it into frames for canvas for the painters. It is where indeed that they have taken cotton and linen, they're looming it to make canvas. It is indeed where they're doing woodworking to make violins, or doing brass work from the ores out of the ground to make trumpets and trombones and tubas, if they're so inclined. It is where they are manufacturing paper for people to write on. The screams and the hollers and the sounds are people getting their fingers caught in the equipment. There's people in there coughing over the noxious fumes. But what apparently would start out, that if we were ordinary and you were using good old OAI consciousness, and from your ordinary perspective and this artificial horizon that consciousness has produced, and you looked up, you saw three separate buildings. Let us assume that you're the ordinary person I'm going to describe, that you thought, boy, that red building, those people are all right. I mean, I would love to have them. I like having them as neighbors. They seem to be involved with worthwhile activities. They're always out doing something constructive. You know, that middle building, you know, it stinks. There's a lot of unpleasant noises coming from there. Even at times I see it looks like garbage being thrown out. I can just barely make it out, but it seems, you know, whatever they're doing, we could sure as hell do without it. I don't need that in my neighborhood. I'm not even sure the planet needs this, right? Right. The third building, God knows, you know, what the hell's it doing there? Maybe it's just something they abandoned. Or something somebody built and they couldn't decide what to do with it. It just sits there. And yet, if you change this artificial horizon, then that which you thought you approved of, you see the red building would not exist. Nothing would be going on. Not even these things that you, in your own consciousness, your own viewpoint, that you find to be favorable. It would not be possible were it not for the one that you thought should be driven from a neighborhood. The government should do something about operations like that. They're obviously involved with activities that have nothing to do with anything worthwhile. And you find out that you wouldn't have the red building on the left were it not for the green one, and you wouldn't have either one were it not for the blue one over there, that as far as you could tell from the artificial horizon view, wasn't doing anything. Just sitting there. But neither one would exist on the left were it not for the one on the right. When you're locked into 3D consciousness, when you're limited to this artificial horizon, not only the one that you thought you approved of, but the one you thought you disapproved of, which of course supported the one you approved of, but neither one of them would be in operation were it not for the one that apparently is doing nothing. to give you a task before this is over regarding this. But now there's several other things I wanted to bring up that I regret it, but it has almost nothing to do with buildings. All of you are aware that throughout history, it's going through a resurgence right now in this part of the world, a cry over the danger of illiteracy. One of the more general comments that I have quoted from history for you and then ask you to neuralize yourself what was the ultimate horizon behind it, not the artificial one, but about the continual cry as far as Yellow Circuit has been recording history, that what we need, what all of humanity needs is more education. All right, I'm just narrowing down the focus a bit. There is recent studies, so I'm told, that now claim that in the United States of America, including Alabama, that close to 30% of the population is functionally illiterate. And that people, again, with renewed vigor, are crying out and attempting to, if not detail, through the Blue Department, to insist upon other people that this is a highly dangerous situation. And then they would go into, I'm sure, I haven't read such reports, I've been very busy, since I found that they're showing green acres on a cable station. Never mind. But I'm sure they would detail such things as we cannot keep our political freedoms unless we have an electorate that is at least literate and knows the issues, can discuss them, can analyze what candidates say, and make a good democratic USA apple pie and mother good choice. But having, I assume, made the point that it vibrated somewhere in all of you, for people or someone or some group to point out that illiteracy is a dangerous thing to go on in this world. Let's assume that somewhere in you, forget where, don't try to describe it or explain it away, that seems right, yeah. That is, assuming, of course, all of you are literate. Any of you who are not, you can take a break from this part. But let me point out something to you in line with what we've been talking about. There is a danger to illiteracy, and it grows from a certain viewpoint. Everything is still in balance. But let me point out to you the reality behind this shadow, the reality behind this mechanical voice speaking about the dangers of illiteracy. It's what you're left with is with such people can't properly think of acting. They're limited to only acting. And I am referring to specific instances that from a wide viewpoint, action would be the least efficient for life's overall growth for the individual to undertake. But the more you're involved with someone who is, in truth, which is almost impossible nowadays, but in truth somebody starts approaching really illiteracy, that they can hardly function, not just reading and writing, I'm expanding the real definition of illiterate, but they're almost non-functional verbal-wise. I mean, it's just limited to hand me a beer and do you want to fuck, and what time is it? The closer they are to being that kind of functionally illiterate, as life is expanding, as the direction of operations of the building is run more and more from the upper stories, then those who are almost functionally illiterate are left, this is all a matter of degrees, but they are left almost with the inability to properly think about acting when that would be the proper course as opposed to acting, and all they can do is act. I see that many of you are not hearing this. Action is absolutely important. When we're talking about the red department, we're talking back down at the level of mining, manufacturing, and then distributing the product that is your life and life's life. it is only a matter of acting. The degree to which they talk down in the mines and back in the factories is almost, what time is it? You know, can you lend me $1 till next week? What are you going to do later? It's too noisy. The work is too hard. The only thing that's involved, if you go to apply for a job down in the mines, you do not have to take an IQ test. They're not going to ask you questions regarding Dante or Chaucer. Or, you know, they'll look at your back, they'll feel your muscles. Go to it. You know, can you sign your name? Sign your name here, now you're signed up. But life is growing more and more. It's accelerating beyond the arithmetic progression to where there is a continual need for people to be able to think about acting instead of acting. They still must act down in the mines, but upstairs, if they're operating on the basis of acting in research and development, what would get done? If you suddenly could move people from the mines up there, or you could move their center of gravity, the people up in research and development, if you could take, let us say, the soul, whatever the hell, you could take the whole orientation of somebody in the mines and suddenly throw it into somebody up in research and development. And there they sit, stroking their beard, sitting at a table. One of them says, well, what we need, we're not getting anywhere with this project, we need a brainstorming session. And suddenly this guy would say, you mean where we sit around and talk for hours and weeks again? They'd say, yeah. And this guy just want to turn around and knock all the equipment off the table if they're in a laboratory and holler, fuck all that, and he'd grab something and start mixing up chemicals, or he'd jump over to a computer keyboard and say, what is this? And it was like, we're going to do something. Talking about acting gets nothing done. I should know because I grew up in the mines. And you go down there and stand and look at coal ore and say, come on, baby, come on, jump to daddy, jump in the cart. You can talk to your neighbor about, boy, I bet if we worked hard, I bet we could dig out in one day maybe 2 tons of coal apiece. And the guy said, nah, maybe 1,800, not 2. And you sit there all day and talked about it, you wouldn't get any. You people are nuts up here. But another question I can give to you. Can you find on your own instances? I keep bringing up these little examples, oftentimes superficially humorous, that there is the absolute need at times to think about acting rather than acting. While none of you forgetting, if the instance, one who understands and then one who has the ability, if action is what is necessary, there is no amount, no type of thinking about acting that will suffice. You can't replace action when it is necessary with thinking about action. But without the ability to think about acting rather than simply acting, we'd all still be in the mines. Life would not be growing. We would all be from Alabama and there would be no way out. Life would have been dead. It would have stopped at that level. There has to be the ability at times to think about acting instead of acting, when thinking about acting would be more efficient, it would be more profitable. But the closer you are to functionally illiterate, is what life is talking about through the ordinary world, it's not political dangers as such. It's not, well, it's only the illiterates that hold up fruit stands. That's true. And so the circular argument that they can't see seems to be, well, all right, all we got to do is educate everybody, and we won't have hold-up men, we won't have rapists. The danger, in a real sense, that is the inefficient function, or a less efficient function, is those who cannot, in the most fulfilling manner, think about acting instead of simply acting. We rolling? Next paragraph. I have mentioned this area in a way that seemed more connected to the yellow circuitry, the yellow department. Well, let me drag it down a story. And there seems to be a passionate duet going on between you and someone else. Can even include animals, which I can think of a prime example. After a certain length of time, you cease to see the other party. But what you see is your feelings about them. Now, I said an animal. Maybe I'll go ahead and say something about humans, but here is a prime example, since we're all such great dog lovers anyway, is the kind of passion that develops between you and the dog of talking to it and coming home and hugging it, and it wags its tail. It's probably safe to say that almost all of you in here even have some feeling that your dog has almost facial expressions, and that you can sit and talk to it, and not only will it turn its head with a sound, but that it almost has expressions of just a little joy or a little concern or a little curiosity, and it does not. And you can be the world's greatest dog lover, and you sit around with your dog, and it appears to be that kind of way that he almost or she almost has facial expressions. And then somebody else, though, an equally smitten lover of canines, walks into your house and looks at its face. It can be a beautiful dog, but looks at its face, and it's just a drawing of a dog. It's just a blank face with those beautiful eyes, but it's just a blank face. It's another dog. Perhaps a wonderful dog, but you don't ever feel that close to other dogs, and they never feel that close to you. They treat you like, you're just a stranger passing by, and they may or may not give you a notice. But then you look around at somebody else's dog, and you feel the same way. Oh, they love their dog. I love that dog when I'm around it. It'll come up and speak to me for a couple of seconds when I go over to their house. But you look at its face, and you don't ever think about being a little human, or almost a little human. It's a dog. But then your dog. You lay there and roll on the floor with it, or you stand there and talk to him up close, and he makes these faces. And you have ceased to see him, and you see your feelings about him. I thought that might be, if not a prime example, as I said, perhaps an easier example to slip up. How about a person you've lived with? And you may feel as though, well, I'm happy living with this person. Sex is fine with them. We don't have any great arguments. And you're trying to meet them at the airport. And they say, well, we paged the person. They didn't show up. Maybe they were here already and left or went somewhere. Can you describe her or him? Of course, right now, I guess it's still, in a sense, more apropos, this particular example, to men than women, perhaps. But you would find the world full of men. And don't just take this as being a sexist attack, especially you women. But the man could swear, I'm just crazy about her. She's fine with me. She's beautiful. I love her. Sex is great. We got the same kind of interest. And the guy said, well, maybe she was here. Can you describe her to me? Well, no, she's not too tall, and her hair is kind of, well, it's kind of brownish. Well, it's kind of light colored, and I repeat, this is not an attack. This is not some kind of sexist comment upon the nature of man or women, but you can be right up close to something that there is a passionate involvement with. And after a certain length of time, it's almost literally as though you do not see the person, although physically, of course, the light bounces off your retinas and you know they're there, but you don't see them any longer. You see your feelings of them. That you're not even directly looking at the person, or the dog in my prior example. It's your feeling about them. And the feeling may be as positive as it can be in the ordinary world. But you're no longer looking at the person. You see your feelings about them. Of course, since I did bring up the aspect that seemed to be between the sexes, that is, of course, an old complaint, the basis of jokes with women. I fixed my hair. I got half of it shaved off. I walked in, and my husband went, hey, how you doing? Is supper ready? Bought a brand new dress, spent 3 hours at the beauty shop, walked in. Did he notice? No, he looked up and said, hey, and he kissed me on the cheek, and he said, we got any beer? And it's not just some flaw in men. I could stand here and think of another example, because I said it seemed on the surface somewhat lopsided or weighted with women, because women naturally, mechanically pay more attention to appearances. But you must see what I'm speaking about, that you get around the person, that there was initially, and still could be, a passionate attachment. But you remember in the past, I have, either me or I let Kairoot point out that ordinarily men do not experience life, they experience themselves. Which at the time I used that, what little I said, I was really hinting at more what seemed to be ordinary consciousness, on the basis that people do not see Fred. The way in which I described it some years ago, that people can describe Fred, and you have several people that can say they like him, or you could have one or two involved that didn't particularly like him. You could have neighbors, you could have relatives, and everybody describes Fred in a different way. And psychology, of course, would try to point out something about the environment or how the people grew up, and some kind of acquired bias you have toward Fred because of his occupation or his religion. And it is not that. It's not that that's not true. It's not that at the ordinary level, at that artificial horizon, that people can say, all right, well, here's a basis for it. There is a basis beyond all of that. There is a basis to apparent bases. And that is that ordinary consciousness does not in some way experience life or Fred. It experiences itself. And so what I was trying to refine or to repoint tonight was not just what seemed to be just consciousness in general, is actual feeling. There can be somebody that you apparently like or love, or as close to as anybody in the world, and yet after a certain length of time, without some kind of extraordinary effort, assuming it was called for, you no longer actually even see the person. You see your feelings about them. All right. One more thing of a practical nature. I have talked about this in general. I've given tasks that were related to it, but I'm going to tell you specifically. And anyone who doesn't hear this is not listening anymore. Anyone who doesn't use this, you should have pruned yourself out last week, or at least for a while. You should find it curious to the point of internal torture as to why you don't use it. That there is a continuing, unconditionally guaranteed treatment for the feelings that almost everyone in the world has, including you people, when you're back at line level, when you're dealing with that artificial horizon. These kind of feelings of social discomfort, or a kind of self-antagonism, that should cover it all. Just your feeling that I can't get along in the world, or you still feel like on a bad day that your goal with this is forget seeing in 4 dimensions and seeing all these invisible things I say I can see. On a bad day, you think, I would just be willing, I would consider it to be the boon of my life to get to the point that I could go out in public in the morning, go to work, stop at a service station, stop at a 7-Eleven market, and not feel embarrassed, not feel like everybody's looking at me, or not to feel hostile, or not to feel like that I don't know what to say, that I just wish people would leave me alone. I wish I could run my life through some kind of lip sync, that I wouldn't have to, that I could pull up to a store and through some kind of mystical way, a guy would come out and not look at me and bring me a carton of milk and some bread. It's just a feeling that in some way I cannot function socially, verbally. At times it's just, you know, sure you can stand out there and make it sound funny, but at days it just makes my life feel like it's coming apart. It just makes the whole day ruined. And it seems so small if you talk about it in a certain way, and yet it's so real. And I know it's not just a joke, but there is a continual treatment for it that works immediately, and it works forever. That is to undertake a full-time, across-the-board act. It's from beginning to end. If you want to try it consistently, or you just get up on a day that, well, here I am again. As much as I seem to gain from this, I might as well be 16 again. I can feel it right now. I've got to stop and pick up my cleaning before I get to work. I got to do it now. And it's these total pictures and non-pictures, words and non-words. It's your already experience of the feeling that you know you're going to have pulling up there to the window, the woman who's always there. It's irrational, you can't explain it, but having to reach in your pocket, get the ticket, whatever she's going to say, the way she looks at you, just the whole thing, it's almost enough to make you want to commit suicide. And yet, all it is you're driving up, and you got to say, she's going to say good morning, and you got to mumble something, or look in your pocket. And just the whole thing, it seems like these little things are going to kill me. They're making my life unworthy of continuing. And there is an instant, non-fail treatment of it. That is a total act, as though the whole thing was scripted. And I was going to give a hint. I've given this hint once or twice, and nobody ever seemed to get anything out of it. That life knows some of this. It's let the information out before. And it has come out normally in the higher circuits. And it's come about through such things as etiquette. When you get into the real higher reaches of the yellow story, to make it perhaps a little plainer, to get over in the corner offices where real management is, out in the horizontal world, is what would be known as the big shots. The real rich, those that really are controlling at the ordinary level, the economics, the political power over large groups of people. Me and John Marcus call it the big boys. The rest of you should know what we mean. The big boys. At any rate, right quick, and you understand I'm not talking about politics. Economics are the big boys. I'm talking about life in certain areas in the building of life. This has been used for many, many years. I'm talking about thousands of years. As they have, that's where it came from, this sense of this code of etiquette, all the way from how you eat to the way you address people who are your equals, how you address people who might be your superiors, royalty, how you would address and treat your inferiors. And then they passed it along to their children that grew up in that environment, in the halls of external power or just wealth, being power/wealth in the horizontal world, that there is a way to do everything. You do not go off half-cocked. There's a kind of way, there's breeding, there's training. They used to, of course, well, they still do, I'm sure, send their children abroad, wherever that was, from whatever country. You need greater experience. We have someone here, several tutors, someone to teach you how to walk, someone to teach you how to talk. And there are ways in which we behave, regardless of what they do down in the mines, regardless of what they do down in advertising and sales, because those people are kind of funny. But up here, there's a way to do everything. When someone comes in your office, you know whether they're the chairman of the board or whether it's one of the guys from the union. You know there's ways we talk about it. We already decide whether you stand up and come from behind your desk and say, so glad to see you. Or whether you sit there and continue to write and say, yeah, what is it? It's all an act. I, of course, am not also am not inferring in some way that the big boys are involved with this. But I was trying to show you that this information is already known. The ultimate use of it is not taken, because I am telling you the ultimate use. That if you have to do it on a day-by-day basis or whenever it seems appropriate, I am telling you the constant, never-ending, never-failing treatment of that feeling of any kind of social discomfort or this self-directed antagonism. That, well, I'm just no good. I just can't hold my head up. I can't walk in there again, that big old woman, and pick up my cleaning. I don't know what it is. It's the whole ambiance of the place. It's the way she acts. It's some kind of psychological trauma from my childhood. I can't deal with it. Of course, if you're ordinary and said that, I'd agree. You know, you can't deal with it. That's your dealing with it. That's the grid rolls on. But I'm telling you, there is a continual instant treatment for it. It's to just immediately undertake an across-the-board, total, complete act. And it doesn't matter what. You know what it is. However it is that you would go in and behave as do something else. And I don't mean something irrational and silly. It doesn't have to be that by any means. That's not necessarily the efficient way, even though I've given you a little isolated task, but it is simply to walk in and to speak, to hold your head, to say. You can decide beforehand. Any of you who still belong in this, it's like making up an instant script. Nothing strange. One thing you speak first is stride right in that door and say, "Good morning. How are you?" And the voices, both public and private, perhaps in you are already moaning about life is such a drag. I can't stand having to pick up cleaning. I can't stand to have to speak to one more stranger who says, "Have a nice day," or to ask me, "How am I?" and they don't care. And if they knew me, they would not only would they not care, they would not even care that they don't care about it. I'm at loose ends, I am clumsy, I don't look right, my clothes don't fit. I know everybody hates me and laughs at me, and there is, for you people, for anybody involved with this, until you understand otherwise. Anytime you go to this, it's not childish, and I'm not making fun of it. What is really childish and what is unprofitable is not to use this, because all you've got to do is completely, totally act. That is, make up immediately your own sense of conduct, of etiquette. It just simply has to be an act, and you know what an act is. It's anything that you wouldn't ordinarily do. But nothing irrational. It is simply that you go in, and the whole thing might as well, somebody wrote it out. Of course, I could do it for all of you. But I'm not going to, not as long as Green Acres Zone, I got something good to do, because you do it yourself. You simply walk in, and wherever you move, however you would normally do, when you walked into there, you pulled up in your car at the pickup window. However position you take, and the way you set the steering wheel, and that you always wait until the last minute, and she has to say, "Good morning, you have your ticket," and you always have to do this, is you have an act, is anything that you wouldn't ordinarily do. The mechanical behavior down in the minds, starting there at the muscles, have the ticket out, pull up, look at her first and speak first, and say, "Is it spring or not? Hey, how are you? Got my ticket." Now, sometimes I lose this little sucker, but I bet that's annoying to you sometimes, isn't it? I bet that makes things more difficult. "Here's my ticket." "My, that's a pretty dress you have on." The only thing funny about all this is the frightening aspect of it is that it's true. You have changed every possible triad going on. You have, in fact, shifted the grid system to a tolerable degree. And you did it. And it is instant, continuing treatment. It never runs out until you understand otherwise. That is, until the problem's gone, the apparent problem. But it is absolute treatment right then. And all you got to do is act. It is a continual floating, personal invented, personally script. You got to be right in the future now, just a second. If you're scripting the whole thing, it's an act. The task, this goes for everyone hearing the tape. My drawing of Lice Company's building that you saw earlier, and that I gave, here's why I told you I was only giving some descriptions. I gave 3 possible responsibilities, starting at the bottom story. If you recall, I pointed out the red department, the bottom story, the 3 responsibilities that I could name would be that department in charge of the mining, the manufacturing, and the distribution. At the mid-story, the blue department would be involved, among other things, of sales, advertising, and employee relationships. And at the upper story, the yellow department, the 3 areas of possible responsibility that I pointed out would be in research, would be in development, and the management of the corporation. That particular building, at least. The task I want to give you for a week, those of you listening out of town, if you find anything worthwhile, as always, go ahead and mail it to me. I'm always glad to see that which I'm glad to see. Or, put otherwise, I'm always pleased to be pleased. Of course, that's just the kind of guy I am. I want you to try and make a list, but to come up with what would other words, other descriptions, what would be other possible responsibilities of those 3 departments. Because I only use 3 possible descriptions. Because I assure you, that one building houses the operations that runs everything. So, you know, you don't have to go find a book or go home and have a brain hernia. Everything that's going on, everything that's been going on, the primary responsibility for anything you see is coming from one of those departments. And of course, it's not just for the sake of you coming up with a list, but for you to neuralize it yourself. And the reason I gave you 3 descriptions is to get you started along certain lines. Because in one sense, I gave kind of the most general, or extremely wide description within my 3 areas I mentioned for each of the 3 departments. But within there, you can find all kinds, all sorts of different degrees that should strike you in some personal way. That the discovery is yours, that will connect with something else that you expanded.